The last recording was a stripped-down affair. No background vocals, no equipment tricks, just the song, his voice, the chords, the truth. He burned a few CDs and started passing them around one at a time. No fanfare, no press release, just a simple gift. "This is for anyone who needs it," he said to Sarah when he gave her a copy. "If it helps someone feel seen, that's enough." Sarah, who had emerged as sort of the song's unofficial spokesperson, took it to heart. She gave the CD to friends and community organizations. Always with the same message: this isn't about John Kennedy. It's about the discussions the song could trigger. And trigger them? It did. A local church played it at a small group meeting between coffee and donuts, then invited open discussion about faith, fear, and the stuff in between. At a community center, it was used to launch a storytelling night, with individuals sharing stories of struggle and strength. The song continued to pop up in the most unlikely of places. The teens' leader Kennedy had received feedback that her teens had opened up in ways they never had before. They confessed that they felt like they were pressured to just believe without knowing what that even was. The song made them feel less guilty for questioning things. The retired veteran, he began a weekly breakfast club. Nothing elaborate, just some dudes with coffee and eggs using the lyrics as an icebreaker for life's highs and lows. No advertising, no buzz, just quiet word of mouth and hearts beating with something real. Most of them didn't even mind that it was written by a senator from the US. The name didn't count. What counted was the honesty of the song. Its humanness, its authorization to not know everything. While Kennedy wrestled with it all, not only the attention, but the significance. He'd never considered himself a musician or a spiritual voice. He was merely a man who'd compose a song in the dark, attempting to find the meaning in things. But the letters, the phone calls, even short stop-and-shop conversations, they all informed him something had changed, and it was transforming him too. In the workplace, he became more expansive, more patient. He heard more intently when his colleagues spoke about personal struggles. During quiet hours, his prayers were different now, not rehearsed or practiced, but honest and true. From the heart, not from a script. Whispers of Faith hadn't only worked on others, it had softened him too. Taught him that to be vulnerable did not make him weaker. It made him accessible. He even began attending some of the small parties that had sprouted up. Not to play, just to sit, to listen, to be a part of it. When queried, he told his tale. But more often, he listened to others speak, because he understood something true. When the truth is heard, it doesn't remain small. It expands. It reaches. And somehow it continues to bring people together. One of Sarah's friends passed the song along to her book club, where it prompted an intense discussion about faith and genuineness that lasted hours. A college student in Shreveport, whose cousin had attended the barbecue, played the song for her campus ministry group. That simple act precipitated a chain of poignant meetings centered around working through doubt during the tumultuous years of young adulthood. What was so compelling about the song wasn't necessarily the melody or the singer behind it. It was the manner in which it created space. Space for others to pour their own narratives into it. The song didn't preach. It didn't try to tell anybody what to believe. It just gave honesty. And this honesty resonated far outside religious spheres. This wasn't a religious song. It was a song about the human quest for meaning, about how brave it is to keep asking questions when you're not sure you'll get an answer. Kennedy was stunned by the accounts which reached him. They all felt like a strand in a bigger tapestry he hadn't intended to weave. The song apparently wasn't his to hold on to. It was a trust, something he'd been placed in charge of. And the further he let it go, the further it reached the people who needed it the most. As these meetings continued to multiply, they started to develop a rhythm. Some took place in living rooms, some in church basements or small community centers. They weren't fancy or formal, but they were intended for something. Someone would play the song. Then people would discuss. No one anticipated answers. These weren't problem-solving spaces. They were spaces for being heard, for finding out you weren't going through the tough spots of life by yourself. "Suppose we did this," she said. "Not a big thing, just something small, something honest. where we can have this kind of conversation. Be honest with each other. Others perked up at the suggestion. Some volunteered their homes. Others said community rooms or quiet coffee shops. The pastor thought the church had a little room that would accommodate something casual, an honest space for conversation. Mike, as always, volunteered to organize, smiling as he promised to provide the barbecue. That elicited a warm laugh from the group, diffusing some of the emotion for a moment with a little welcome humor. But under the laughter, there was something genuine. They were serious. This wasn't something on an occasional basis. It mattered. Kennedy spoke again, finally, his voice gentle and contemplative. I'm no expert on this stuff, he said, but if my song helps start something that lets folks be honest, I'm all for it. He gave a small smile, his southern drawl gentle as ever. Just don't expect me to sing every time. Don't expect me to sing every time, Kennedy teased, and the group laughed, but they knew he was serious. Not the singing exactly, but the truth of it. What was important wasn't performance, it was honesty, connection, authenticity, and that honesty, it didn't stay in the backyard. Over the next few days, people started to whisper about what had occurred that evening. Friends talked to friends. Coworkers brought it up at the coffee machine. Before long, what began as a backyard barbecue in a humble Baton Rouge neighborhood became something of a whispered legend. People who hadn't even been there asked about it, curious to know more about the senator who had turned a casual karaoke night into something unforgettable, something sacred. Some approached Kennedy directly, hesitant but genuine. At a community gathering, a woman from the local library intercepted him. She'd heard the song from Emily. I wasn't present, she whispered, but I listened to what you sang, and it's made me reflect on my own life, on the things I don't speak of, because I'm afraid they make me sound weak. She paused. Do you think somehow I could hear it? Kennedy was shocked. He hadn't thought that the song would extend past that single evening, and he certainly wasn't accustomed to people seeking access to something so intimate. But he smiled and vowed that he'd make it happen. The notion of the song, this deeply intimate thing about himself, spreading outside his little clique was both humbling and somewhat daunting. But the more people inquired, the more Kennedy began to change his mind. Perhaps this wasn't about him anymore. A youth pastor called, wanting to share the song with his teens, many of whom were grappling with questions of faith in a world that rarely seemed to have many answers. A veteran who had attended the barbecue told Kennedy he'd been humming the chorus for days, comforted by its sincerity, something he'd not experienced in years. The songs continued to flow, and with each of them, it was evident. The song had gained a life of its own. It was now in the hands of everyone who could see their own battles in the words. Kennedy began considering how to do justice to that without making it something it was never supposed to become. He didn't want to sell it. He didn't need praise or attention. He just wanted the song to continue doing what it had begun to do, making people feel less alone. So he decided. He would record it, just a straightforward version. No large platform, no slick production, just a simple, genuine recording that he could give to those who requested it. He called Mike, and they discovered a little recording studio hidden away in town, a musician's studio owned by someone local who saw what the song was all about. The session was hushed, intimate. Kennedy, his guitar, and a sound engineer who sat with reverent silence listening. When they were done, the engineer looked up, emotionally shaken. This is different, he said. It's not selling anything. It's just true. Kennedy nodded. That was precisely what he had been wishing for. John, I don't even know how to say this, she started. That song, it was like you spoke words over things I've been afraid to confess, even to myself. She hesitated, looking around at the others who had crept in close, drawn by the quiet left behind from the song. I've been wrestling with my faith for years, questioning if I'm doing it wrong, because I don't always feel sure. She gazed back at him, searching eyes and genuine. I think a lot of us would feel the same, and you just made it all right to say out loud. John nodded, his throat constricted, not knowing how to answer. He wasn't accustomed to being the one to push open that type of door, the door that allows individuals to walk into their own truth. In the Senate, in interviews, on campaign trails, he was always supposed to have answers. to be strong, certain. But here, with friends and coworkers and neighbors, something had changed. For once, he didn't have to be the public man with the answers. He could just be human. Mike, his friend who had razzed him a few minutes before, ambled over next. His usual strut had given way to softness. "Man," he said, looking a little embarrassed, "I was just joking about the karaoke." His voice fell. "But what you did on stage, that was something else." He glanced away for a second, then back at John. "Been through some tough times. Lost my dad a couple of years ago. It shook me more than I thought it would. Made me think about a lot of things I thought I'd worked out. Hearing you sing about that kind of struggle, it struck a chord. Like maybe I'm not alone in feeling lost sometimes." His words sent a ripple through the group. Heads nodded. People exchanged knowing glances in the dim light. Emily, the young campaign worker, stepped forward next. Her eyes shone bright, her voice full of feeling. "John," she said, "I was raised in a church where questioning wasn't simply frowned upon. It was nearly a sin. You were to have all the answers, and if you didn't have them, you kept them to yourself. But your song, it made me realize maybe my questions don't make me a failure. Maybe they're part of the way." Her vulnerability attracted others, and before long, the small party became something else. Stories poured out, some reluctant, others like long exhaled sighs. Loss, work stress, moments of personal crisis, spiritual uncertainty, each of them had something to say. The pastor, who had been sitting in silence at a table nearby, finally broke in. His words were firm but soft. "John, your song brought to my mind the Psalms," he said. "They're full of outcries to one, of people crying out and asking why the world seems so burdensome, why he sometimes seems distant." He nodded slightly. "That's what your song did. Your song gave us permission to speak the truth about the tough stuff, and that's a true gift." The others started to chime in, their voices weaving together like yarn in a common tapestry. A school teacher from the community discussed how she always felt compelled to be an example, even when she didn't know what she believed anymore. A nurse who had spent countless hours working during the last hurricane confessed how difficult it was to pray when she had seen so much pain. Each tale was greeted with whispered nods, soft words, and an air of Me Too that tied them all together more tightly. Chairs were drawn into a loose circle under the warm lights, the evening's formality giving way. The children who had been playing outside now rested in balls of blankets, some sleeping and others observing the adults with silent interest, aware, though they didn't necessarily comprehend, that something significant was going on. Kennedy listened, didn't say much, but was there, absorbing everything and letting the voices claim the space his song had left. And in the silence, he learned something significant. His vulnerability had opened a kind of sanctuary, a space where others could leave their burdens behind as well. Time passed on. The night air chilled, but nobody was in a rush to go home. The karaoke machine, which had been the highlight of the evening, now lay silenced in the corner, its screen black, abandoned. For the true music of the night had been the voices of individuals expressing their truth. Others talked about how certain words from his song reflected their own stories. Words of stretching out to find hope in the darkness, of listening for a voice of faith when all else seemed quiet. Others mentioned they couldn't recall the last time they had felt safe to speak these words aloud. And little by little it became apparent that backyard with its fold-out chairs, string lights, and picnic tables had become almost holy. A space where appearance didn't dictate truth, where questions could exist without answers. As the discussion gained depth, Sarah again interrupted, her tone now urgent with purpose and hope. Laughter coursed through the crowd. Kennedy, meanwhile, was in the middle of plating up another batch of burgers. He smiled and brandished his tongs like a shield. "Mike, you know I'm just here to keep y'all full," he teased, his drawl easy and smooth. "Besides, with Lisa's rendition of Jolene, I think we've already had the highlight of the evening." But Mike wasn't dropping it. He approached with the familiar glint in his eye and threw in, "Oh, come on, Senator. Don't pretend we haven't heard you sing along to the radio driving. You've got a song in there somewhere." The ribbing caught on fast. "Yeah, John, give us a song," Emily yelled. a young aide who had worked on his previous campaign. You can't hide behind the grill forever. The kids even got into the act, chanting "Sing, sing," as they danced around the lawn. Kennedy smiled, spreading his hands in feigned surrender. But there was a flash of something else in his eyes. Something gentler. He wasn't the kind of man to pursue the spotlight, least of all this way. Yes, he gave speeches daily, could dominate a Senate floor without even getting warm. But singing, that was intimate, exposed. But he gazed out at all the familiar faces. These weren't politicians or voters. These were individuals who'd sat at his table, exchanged stories, watched him tired, or laughing, or spaced out. Individuals who knew the individual behind the senator. Sarah, feeling him unsure, moved in quietly. "John," she whispered, "we're not requesting a concert, just something authentic. You always say that you're honest with people. This is one of those times." Something in the way she phrased it stuck. It wasn't teasing any longer. The entire yard had become quieter. Mike still smiled, Emily nodded approvingly. Even the pastor at the end of the picnic table raised his cup in silent support. They weren't simply wishing for a song. They were wishing to catch a glimpse of his heart. Kennedy gazed down, then at the small stage. For once, that characteristic flash of confidence wavered a fraction. "I don't sing karaoke," he said at last, his voice lower now. "Not because I don't enjoy it, just when I do sing, it's not necessarily for enjoyment. It's significant. It means something." He gazed back at them all, his voice firm, but the openness still present. "And songs like that," John murmured, "aren't always what a party is about." His tone wasn't teasing anymore. It had dropped, and with it, the entire backyard seemed to come to a quiet stop. The teasing mood dissolved into something more subdued, more reflective. Mike, the one who'd begun all the teasing, moved forward. His face had softened too. No more grinning, just honest warmth in his eyes. "Perhaps what we need tonight, John," he murmured, "isn't a show, just something real. We all know there's more to you than speeches and sound bites. Let us see it." The words hung in the air, and heads in the yard moved in affirmation. Folks had drawn in closer now, kind of huddled around Kennedy. The string lights above seemed to sway with the gentle night breeze, their soft light casting shadows like candlelight. Music playing in the background had muted to the point of whispers, as if even the speaker knew the moment required silence. John scanned his surroundings, truly scanned. These were not simply co-workers or volunteers for the campaign. They were individuals who had been by his side through late nights, bruising elections, meals eaten together, and genuine conversations about life, purpose, and the in-between messiness. And now they were not requesting entertainment. They were requesting a portion of him, something authentic, something genuine, and something began to stir within him. He'd thought about it all night, a memory that had risen up quietly as the evening progressed. A few years earlier, in the midst of one of the toughest periods in his life, he'd written a song. Not for an audience, not for claps, simply to get through, to find sense in the doubts and questions that wouldn't leave him be. He'd titled it Whispers of Faith. It was quiet, unfinished, but profoundly real. A song about those quiet times when faith seems uncertain, when the cacophony of the world overwhelms the still, small voice you once counted on. He'd never told anyone, not even his friends. It was too raw, too intimate, a little bit of his heart wrapped up in music. "I wrote something once," he said at last, almost a whisper. "It's not clean, and it's not what you'd call a party tune." He hesitated, the words spilling out slowly. "It was from a hard time, when I wasn't sure I believed anymore." One peaceful evening in Louisiana, a casual backyard barbecue went off script. A familiar man, normally a fond of answers, did something no one could foresee. He offered a question concealed within a tune. What happened next left everyone in stunned silence, and altered more than the night. For those of you who think there's power in quiet truth, this tale may linger with you. Press play to explore. It began with a joke, a gentle nudge toward a microphone on a still Louisiana night. No one was prepared for what ensued, not a show, but a confession in song. And by the final chord, the backyard had become something sacred, something new. What happens when a man who is used to giving answers chooses to offer his questions instead? Can one rough, unplanned song, sung just once by accident, awaken the quiet in others and open the way for long-hidden truths? This is a tale of an evening that started with laughter and left something much more profound behind. A tale of the soft strength of truth and how one moment of risk-taking can reverberate far beyond the people who see it. Let me explain what took place the evening John Kennedy sang Whispers of Faith, and how that song, forged in uncertainty, enabled strangers to speak their own unspoken truths. John Kennedy did not intend on singing that evening. In fact, when someone first joked with him about it, he just laughed the idea away. But when he did, ultimately, the song he sang, something subdued, something deeply intimate, reduced the entire assembly to tears. It was one of those warm, golden Louisiana nights where the air is thick with summer and the scent of sizzling burgers and jasmine blooming fills the air everywhere. There were around 40 folks in a friendly backyard in a peaceful Baton Rouge neighborhood. Friends, co-workers, families, all here for a relaxed barbecue. Laughter and jokes hung in the air, blended with the thud of children playing on the lawn and tunes streaming from a small radio on the side. A combination of classic rock and Zydeco provided the evening with an easygoing, good-feeling atmosphere. String lights danced lightly over the picnic tables, which were laden with potato salad, cornbread, and large pitchers of sweet tea. It was one of those wonderful nights when individuals could put work aside and just be together. Standing at the middle of it all was Senator John Kennedy, except you wouldn't know he was anyone special by just glancing at him. He had on a polo top and jeans and was flipping burgers at the grill, laughing and throwing silly jokes at anyone who walked by. He looked more like your friendly neighbor having a barbecue than a public figure. This barbecue had begun as an informal gathering, a means by which Kennedy's tight group could meet in smaller, suitless, speechless, and more relaxed planes. Some were from his Senate staff. Some were others who had been friends with him in law school. A few were neighbors or people from the nearby community. What they had in common was history, trust, and the pleasure of known faces. At the edge of the yard, a small makeshift stage had been erected. It was simple stuff, just a wooden stage with a mic, two speakers, and a karaoke machine. The last of those was Sarah's suggestion, a staffer who had insisted that some music would make the night all the more pleasant. And she'd been correct. Thus far, they'd had a nervous but entertaining rendition of Sweet Caroline, from a local minister to a better than they had any right to be rendition of Stand By Me by one of Kennedy's campaign workers. Each singer, no matter how shaky or off-key, received cheers and applause. The crowd enjoyed it all. Kennedy, however, kept far from that microphone. He was more than content to interrogate, converse, and watch the children playing a game of tag in the backyard. With his drawl and storytelling ability, he could get even strangers to think of him as an old friend. But when somebody would attempt to pull him onto the stage, he'd simply laugh and brush it off with a quip about how his voice was meant for the shower and not the stage. As the sun set low, bathing the horizon in warm oranges and pinks, the entire atmosphere melted into something even more laid back. Folks had relaxed, a couple of beers had been shared, and the karaoke acts had gotten braver and sillier. It was then that Mike, Kennedy's closest of friends, an attorney who'd been friends with him since college at Vanderbilt, figured it was time to get a little pushback. "Come on, John," he called out with a grin, raising his voice just enough to get everyone's attention. "You've been dodging the mic all night. Let's hear what you've got."